Azgaar's fantasy map generator is my favourite way to start a new world. It really gives you everything that you need to create a realistic terrain and particularly with multiple biomes. In order to keep the workflow for Azgaar's fantasy map generator in one video, I've not gone into as much detail on the background around height maps, and I've also not included the full Blender workflow. These are both covered in previous videos in the tutorial series. So if you've come straight to this video, you may want to pause, take a look at particularly video 1 of the playlist, and then video 3 for the Blender steps. But hopefully, even if you are coming straight to this video, everything should be easy to follow along. When you start up Azgaar's fantasy map generator, the first thing you're going to want to do is make a square aspect ratio. So you just need to pop out this little arrow here, go to options and change the canvas size. I've used 1300 by 1300. If you go too high, it seems to just not respect the inputs and then you get a non-square aspect ratio, but we really don't need it to be that high. Once you've selected your aspect ratio, the next thing you're going to want to do is take a look at the height map. At this, I've got continent selected for now, but you depending on what you're looking to make, select the option that suits you. Just going to cancel that for now. So I think by default it shows you the states layer, perhaps the rivers as well and some other stuff. But because we're going to be using this for Gaia, I think perhaps this is something to come back to later. We're going to be mostly interested in two things. The height map. What I really like about this is the fact that I think the height map is actually fairly realistic how it's generated. In a previous video in Wonderdraft, it seemed to be quite random, the noise, whereas this actually gives you quite a decent starting point. And then what I really love is the biomes. So what this is doing, it will use the terrain height map to determine what the biomes should be like. So if I just switch the biomes off for a second, we can see here that we've got this kind of raised elevation here on this part. And in real life, when I guess weather fronts would predominantly come in from one direction, and as the clouds pass over the mountains, then the rain will fall more on one side of the mountain than the other. And then because all of the rain has been dumped here, then there's kind of less precipitation on the other side of the mountains. And this simulates this really nicely. So you can see here we've kind of got, these where the mountains are, kind of got a sort of more lush greens on this side and across the top here. And then kind of more sort of deserty areas here. So we're going to want to output these two files. I found with the biomes, it was actually better if we set the rendering to best performance rather than best quality. This actually simplifies the colors, and this actually makes it easier to manipulate in Photoshop later. So export that as a PNG. The other thing that we want is the height map. Now, you can have the rivers as generated by the fantasy map generator, but I actually want to give this control to Gaia. I think because we're going to make some procedural changes to the terrain, I want the rivers to kind of accurately reflect the terrain that we ultimately create. So I think I'll switch these off for now. Now, This is easy for us to interpret by eye with the colors, but we don't actually want that for Gaia. We want a monochrome. So we want to go to Style, and then on the Style preset, change this to monochrome. And this is what we're going to output. So again, export and PNG. And this is what will be our input to Gaia. So the next step is to then take the biomes into Photoshop. Okay, once you've loaded up your image into Photoshop or a free alternative like GIMP, the main thing we're looking to achieve here is to create different masks to correspond to the different biomes. Now, you can have as many biomes as you want for your world. You don't have to use absolutely every single color that's been used here. Particularly for me, my red-green color blindness meant that I didn't really notice the difference between these two, but there we are. So just have a think. Look at your map and think, what do you want the colors to correspond to? So for this kind of dark, vibrant green here, I've set this as a jungle mask. And then I've gone through, I've got a lush green or lush grass, a medium grass, a dry grass, a desert, a rocky, and ice. So the idea here is that we're going to create separate PNG files where we'll have one biome shown in white with a black background. So to do this, you first want to add a new layer of solid color, and we are going to go for all black, and this is going to be our background. I've already got one, so I'll delete this one. And then we're going to create additional layers for each biome. So I just went through and I added more solid colored layers, this time selecting white as the color, and then renamed them just to help keep track of everything and make sure I didn't forget any of the particular colors. So I'll recreate this jungle layer just to kind of show you, but then it's just a case of repeating for each biome. So to do this, we create our white layer, click on the mask, and then click invert. Now, if the workflow is slightly different in GIMP, or there's any of the kind of features that aren't available, I think these should be available in GIMP. They're pretty simple. But the reality is the end product is what we need, not the, the process isn't important. What we're looking for is to generate images like this. And they only need to be rough images. You can see how there's kind of bits of color that, probably shouldn't be there. That's okay. We're going to be processing these quite heavily in Gaia, so it just needs to be rough. But this is just the quickest way that I found. So what we want to do is select the original image layer, and then head up to the select menu, color range, and then with the dropper tool, select the biome that you're currently selecting. I find the best workflow is to select it once with the dropper, then click the one with the little plus symbol and just click around. I think there's a little bit of sort of color bleed from the surrounding colors. So just click around a few times and you can see more selection appearing on the map. So once you're happy, click OK. And then we just need to click on the mask. And then we need to, Then we need to make sure it's enabled. And then fill and white. And now this has created a mask for our jungle biome. You can see here around the edges, it's not quite selected everything. This is because, yeah, these pixels are very slightly darker. This probably can be refined, but honestly, it's not really an issue. You won't notice the difference in Gaia later. So once we've created this, we re-enable the black layer, and then just file, export as PNG, and then save this as your jungle biome. I won't repeat the process here, but in your own time, go through and repeat this step for as many biomes as you want, and then we will process these in Gaia later. So I'm going to be taking us through a pre-existing node graph again today. I just find it just a bit easier to not get lost whilst recording. But the first step is going to be to add a file primitive. And just for a quick reminder, if you know the name, you can just right click and type file, or we can find it here in the menu. So it might not look like this straight away when you first load it in. That's because we want to set up our build settings and go to terrain. And here you can set the width. So this is, what's the distance of one edge of the square in meters. So this is 150 kilometers in this case. And then the height. So again, I've gone for a fairly exaggerated look. So we're just short of the height of Mount Everest, and 150 kilometers is certainly far smaller than this should be if this was an entire continent. So, play around with what looks good to you. But yeah, in my recent poll, it sounds like people prefer the sort of slightly exaggerated look anyway. So the first thing we want to do, obviously we've got quite a lot of obvious lines and steps here. So we're just going to give a slight blur to that. So just dragging out blur node, 0.01 in this case. And as we've done in previous videos, we now want to kind of add some sort of procedural texture, I guess, or roughness to the mountain. So it's just not this big blob as it is now. So to do that, I'm going to use a Perlin node. And I've changed the scale right down. I've set it to ridged. And the other changes I've made is to set the scale on the X and the Y to 5. If you want it to be more stretched in one direction, I guess to create kind of ridges that go kind of north to south more, make these slightly different to each other, and it will create that effect. But I'm going to leave them as 5 and 5 for now. So by dragging out from the blur node into the Perlin node, I create this combine node. And if I just delete this link right now, you can see that this is being applied pretty much everywhere. This is setting it to multiply and a ratio of 1. But I kind of want it to affect the mountains more than the rest of the land. So I've taken a height mask. So we drag out from the file, go to height, and I've moved the left-hand slider all the way up to 0.99. So I'm really kind of selecting just the highest parts, but then I've increased the fall off to 0.66. That gives this kind of like gradual effect going down to the lower areas. And then when we combine that, With the Perlin node, you can see now this kind of like mountainous areas being picked up a bit more obviously. I've done a height remap by clicking this button here, and I've also added a shaper modifier, just reducing it down to minus 0.09 and the height remap to 0.38. So this has given us our kind of starting shapes. So now let's look at modifying these. So I've just added a fractal terrace. So this is just kind of creating some more layers to give the erosion node something more interesting to do. Play around with the settings till you get something that you like. I think this is pretty much default. And then we're going to apply some erosion. Now, for this, because we've changed the scale of the whole terrain, we don't need to bring this erosion scale right the way down. But I've picked this value for the terrain here. I think I've increased the duration slightly, and then also decreased the shape slightly. That by decreasing the shape, it just means that it stays closer to the output from the fractal terraces. This is quite important for sort of maintaining coastlines and things like that. Okay, the next step is to add some rivers. So we just drag out from the erosion node and then into the rivers node. But this time, rather than just allowing Gaia to place rivers all over the map, we have some information from our biomes. So I created an additional layer that I've saved as headwaters. But I simply did this by turning on everything that's not, basically not the dry desert stuff. So the ice, the rocky, medium grass, lush grass, jungle. Maybe, no, I think the medium grass as well. So again, adding that black layer in, and this is just going to say, here's where most of our rivers should start, because this is where we're getting the more precipitation and the kind of snow melt from the mountains and things like that. So export that, and then this goes into create some rivers. And we see now, like when we look at the desert, by default you would have lots of rivers going through a desert, and this is not what we want. We do have nice kind of this nice sort of canyon that's clearly formed, and a river from the mountain where we'll have like snow and ice melt. So I think this gives a really nice effect. You can see here these outputs look different. That's because I've turned them into portals. So to turn these three into portals, it's right click, manage portals, and then convert to portal. So you just want to do this for the depth, and the surface. I think I've increased the water slightly, and importantly, turning the river valley width down to -4 just stops the rivers node creating a load of silt buildup on the kind of at the coast and things like that. Play around with the headwaters amount, and just experiment until you get something you like, really. I then connected a C node, so drag from that out of the rivers to create the C node. And for this, really what you're going to want to do is go back and forth to, I find actually going to this view with the color helps you sort of determine The green is kind of like the edge of the land. So this is sort of the shape that we want to recreate. And you just need to adjust the sea level until you reach that. I've turned, so yeah, 0.06 works for this map. Maybe that's universal for all maps that have been output by the fantasy map generator, but I'm not sure. I've turned coastal erosion on, but taking it all the way down to make the effect as small as possible. And yeah, so now we kind of have the sort of the general shape of the islands nicely visible. The other thing that I've created coming out of the rivers node is a flow node. So just by dragging again out from the out port, select flow. I've left the settings at default, but this is what we're going to use later on to kind of mix our different biomes together. So just again, right click, manage portals, and then convert the out into a portal. Okay, two more things. We've got the trees and the snow. Now, the trees I've added in here, but really for this scale, I feel like it maybe makes it look a little unrealistic, but maybe that's okay. So again, dragging out from the out node of the sea, create a trees node. And again, this time, because we have more information from our biome masks, we can create something to help guide Gaia. So what I've done is I've loaded up the jungle height map that I created. I've then clicked auto level and then invert, because this is inhibition. So we're inhibiting the growth of the trees everywhere else other than the kind of where the jungles are marked. Yeah, so we get the trees kind of growing in the places where we asked. Make sure to turn the count all the way up to 1,000 and adjust the tree size to something that looks good for your map. We'll need these trees later, so we will right click, manage portals, and then just convert the trees output into a portal. So next up is the snow. So we do want the snow to be able to kind of be influenced by the trees if we have them. So I just drag out from the trees node to the input of the snow. If you don't have trees, you just need to go straight from the sea node instead. Now, I want to make this snow follow our biomes and also have kind of a more realistic look. Based on like where the melting will happen from the sunlight. So into the snow map, I just loaded up the ice layer that I outputted from the biomes, which gives us something like this. This is a bit too harsh for me, so I've just added a blur node. So just drag out blur. I've gone for 0.04 for the radius of the blur, just to kind of spread it out. The sunlight map, again, I've just dragged out from the sea in this case. Just type sunlight. Adjust the settings as to what makes sense. I guess I've not done this, but what would make sense would be to match this with what you've created in Azgaar's fantasy map generator. But this is essentially just creating so the light areas are where it's getting a lot of sunshine, and then there's some darker areas where it just really doesn't receive anywhere near as much sunshine. So we're going to plug that into the melt map. And I don't want a huge amount of snow. If you put too much, then you kind of lose quite a lot of the detail. So just play around with the amount of melt, the duration and intensity until you get something that you like. So I really like it when the snow is kind of, settling in the little crevices of the mountains, but you can still see the texture of the rock coming through beneath. Okay, because the snow node is going to be our sort of final 3D node, we're going to make this our underlay by right-clicking and then selecting Use as Underlay. Now, we want to move on to the texturing step, but I want to do this in another graph. Now, because we're going to be texturing the ground primarily, I actually want to start off with the rivers node, because everything else we're going to lay on top of the ground of the rivers node. So to do this, we just want to drag out from the output, create a texture base, and then we're going to move this to another graph by selecting this graph symbol here, and then move to tab and then create a new graph. I've already done this, so I shall delete this and then move over to the texturing graph. Now, this looks like a lot, but don't worry, it's a very kind of repetitive process. So I'll explain it once, and then where we have the different biomes, it's just the same thing over and over again. And then when it gets different again, I'll go through that in more detail. So we've got our texture base, which gives us this kind of black and white texture, picking out the details. Feel free to kind of modify these. I've left them as default, but if you want, say, the kind of the flows from the rivers, or just where precipitation would be flowing across the land, affecting the color more, you would increase the flows. So to start off with, I'm actually going to use a sat map that represents the kind of medium grass. So that's going to be, I think what you want to do is pick a safe baseline that it doesn't matter so much if it's close to the other biomes. So just in case there's some gaps in the map or something like that. I don't think it should be too much of a problem. But for my kind of medium grass, I've selected 116. The selection of the colors obviously is something that you need to do based on what looks good for your map. I'm actually a scientist. I'm not an artist at all. But to my eye, the best thing to do is to not go for things that are too extreme. I'm steering clear of really vibrant desert color right next to a really vibrant grassy color, just because I find the end results can be a bit jarring. But once you've set this up, you can kind of go through and play around with the sat maps as you want. So to get into this kind of these three nodes here, and these three nodes plus a combined node with the previous step is how we're going to gradually build this texture up. So you just want to add a sat map, a file node, and a variable blur node. I find it useful to take a look at the sat map first. So here I've loaded up the jungle mask that we created. So I know that in my sat map, I'm going to go for something that works well for a jungle. So here in the green tab, I've just selected 111, just for kind of like a deeper green color. And I'm going to combine this with the previous sat map by dragging it out from here to the input of the previous step. This will automatically create this combine node. So the thing we need to do is to then mix these two nodes together. Now, if we just used the file as we created it, it would be really quite stark. In fact, this needs inverting, but you can see that it would, yeah, that's strange behavior. I don't think it's supposed to do that. In any case, you can see, imagine the colors the other way around, but you have these kind of like harsh edges, and we don't want that. So in order to get rid of that, we're going to use a variable blur node. So drag out from the file to the in of the variable blur. And the way the variable blur works is you give it a second input that controls how much blurring is happening at that position. And this is where I like that flow node from the previous step. So what this is showing is, I guess, the flows from the precipitation. And in fact, perhaps we could have done the same trick with the rivers and included this into the precipitation here as well. But yeah, I've not done that, so I won't change that for now. But this kind of shows essentially where the water would be running, and where the water runs, it takes the color with it. So going back here, if I now show this, this looks a little bit ugly, but this is going to then blend our colors in together. So I've set the radius to 0.31 here for quite a large effect. And then we just need to drag that output into the mask. And now we can see that the blending is quite a bit smoother. It's hard to see here with the green on green, but the kind of at the sort of boundaries of the biomes, you get a much more natural look. So then exactly the same process over and over again now for each of the different biomes. So I've now got my lush grass. Here I've selected 118 as my sat map. Again, giving it quite a lot of blur here, so 0.58. Dragging it out from the sat map to the previous step, plugging in the variable blur as the mask. We get this. Now for the dry grass, I've used satmap 168. So this does have some green in there as well, and that's quite nice. So this is now using that texture node. It's going to have green in some areas, but kind of like a more of a brown color in others. What I've done here is I've shifted the colors so that it's more in the middle. So I've kind of cut out some more of the green. So we're just using this part of the color spectrum here. My variable blur I've set to 0.38. Not particular I've just been sort of clicking around about here, but just play around till you get something that looks nice. And here you can start to see perhaps more of the effect of, if I go, we can see the color kind of flowing a bit more. The next step is the desert. So I actually combined a couple of colors from the biome. Could have gone for two different types of desert, but I've just combined them into one. For this, again, so I've picked in the sands tab 301, and this gave me something that I felt sort of complemented the other colors. Same process, file, variable blur. And this is when you kind of start to see that combine happening in a nice way. So I've set this to 0.24. I guess I don't want the greens going too far into the desert in this case. But yeah, and you can see the kind of the sand perhaps being sort of washed into areas of the sort of more jungly areas up here. So that's combining nicely. For the rocky, so I went to rock and I've selected 191. Variable blur of 0.28. Again, we could combine, and you know, this isn't coming through too much, but there wasn't too much in the original biome. You can see here that the mountains are still looking pretty green. And this is where we're going to do something a little bit different. So the input, again, the texture base using the portals. This time we're going to combine with the previous step, but we're going to set a slope node. Now, I need to get this right. So we actually want, in this case, to go up from the combine node into the sat map. And this is really the reason why it's important to get this the right way round is, actually, let's just double check. So out from there. Yes, we want the new sat map to be in the bottom port. And the reason why it's important the which way round as we get is because we're going to add a slope node. And again, using the portals, I've added the C node as the input here. And I want to only select the sloped areas that correspond to the kind of the high peaks. So I've selected, I've changed the range so that this is going from 90 degrees down to around 67 with a bit of fall off. But then I've also added in a mask by height modifier. So just click this button here, add the mask, and then I've just moved it up so that we're, you know, to 0.56, because without it, you end up getting all of these kind of like coastal cliffs as well. And yeah, I just didn't like the look. I can show you what this looks like. You can see, you know, maybe it's not so bad, but I just didn't want the slope color being applied to these cliffs as well. Okay, let's return that height back to where it was. It's 5.6. And this is now kind of, you know, making sure that we've got the sort of darker colors on the kind of peaks and slopiest parts of the mountains. There's still a bit of green going on, so you know, maybe these are like jungle mountains where the kind of, you know, vegetation is growing all the way up. If you don't want that, you just need to make this mask a bit different. So just changing the slope values, and then we'll see kind of less green. Yeah, I quite like that. Okay, so now we want to add in the water. So I'm going to do the rivers first, and then we'll add the sea. So create another sat map and drag out from the sat map to the previous combine node to create a new combine node. And then we're just going to create the mask. So to do this, right click and type FX to bring up an adjust node. And the input for this one, we want to be the river's depth. So just manage, right click, manage portals, select river's depth. And then the adjustments we want to make, we want to auto level this and invert it just to make it a bit stronger. So then when we click to the combine node, you can see they're fairly faint still. But I guess that's because of the scale of the terrain kind of makes that a bit harder to see. But a bit more realistic. If you want to make them a bit more obvious, we can equalize them and then they will come up much brighter. I guess if we want to kind of go somewhere between the two, we can turn off equalize and then perhaps use the shaper node. So we can just turn that down a bit. Yeah, okay, that looks good. Okay, so the next step is to incorporate the sea. So to do this, again, another sat map where we use the sea portal, the depth, and this means that so because the original height map actually had some levels of height in the sea as well, that's given us some kind of interesting texture around. I've picked 56 in the blue section, but I found it was just a bit too blue for me. So I've just plugged this into an HSL, which stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. And I've just turned the saturation down a little bit to minus 0.29 and the lightness up to 0.11. This gives me a bit more, yeah, I just liked the look of this color a bit more. So we will drag out from that to the previous combine node again, and then we'll use the C mask. So we want to create another adjust node, then add the sea water portal to the input. And we just need to invert this. So I've just clicked invert, and then we have this. So now we are pretty much there. We have one final step for the texturing, and that is to add in that snow. So this time we're just going to drag out from the combine node and then create another combine node. And then in the second input, we are going to go to manage portals, and then it's going to be snow. So it's the snow output from the snow node. And we're going to set the ratio to 1 and set it to add. And this just kind of adds this now on top of what we had before. So yeah, so there's the texturing done. This, you know, as you can see, we've got the different biomes kind of blending in quite nicely now. And yeah, I guess the final step now is to create the last file that we need for rendering this in Blender, which is a water map. So this is just going to help us determine which areas should be reflective and which ones shouldn't. So in order to do this, I've just added 2 adjust nodes where we have, using the portals, we've got the sea water and the river's depth. For the sea water, I've left it as is. For the river's depth, I've turned on auto level, equalize, and strong, and then just combine these two using the add and setting the ratio to 1, and then a final adjust node to, again, auto level and invert this. And this is just to make sure that, because we're plugging this into the roughness input on Blender, we want the land to be rough and the water to be reflective. Okay, now all that's left to do is to mark the nodes that we want to export. So we want to export this adjust node for a water mask. Let's make sure, yeah, rename it water mask. This combine node, let's rename this to texture, because this is going to provide our final color. And then going back to the original graph, going to the snow node and yeah, export this because this is going to provide our kind of 3D height map. Go over to Project, Build Settings, set the resolution. So if you're on the free version, this will be 1K, but I've been setting it, I think 4K has been giving me pretty good results without taking too long. At this point, you can experiment with different width and height values as well. And the final thing, I just like to change the texture and the water mask to PNG 16 instead of EXR. Just easier for processing the colors later. So when you're ready with that, hit execute build, and then we're ready to load it up into Blender. Okay, once Gaia is done, you now have everything you need to load up your Blender scene and create some stunning renders. I'm not going to go through the details in this video because I've already covered that in a previous video. So if you want to check out part 3 of the tutorial series, you'll be able to load all of your files up to create a nice attractive image in Blender. Now's a good time to talk about realism and how the height here is overemphasized, especially for something of this scale, if this was meant to be a continent. I'm going to explore in my next video making this look as realistic as possible, and that includes mapping the maps that we've generated onto a globe with realistic clouds taken from satellite images and stuff like that. So make sure you hit subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay notified for when that video comes out. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video.